It's kind of a wealth transfer from the UK to these foreign buyers. If we don't change how we do this, are we going to end up?
In 2000, Chris Ulla started an investment company with his friends from his lounge.
He sent us this long email one day. This animal is an octopus. That is what you should call your company. We registered the name the next day.
Little did they know then that they would have billions under management and be spinning out unicorns that you've probably heard of.
Things have just continued to fly along across the group, but particularly Octopus Energy. Now we serve 1 in 4 UK households.
And they are expanding into new areas. You want to do to money what Octopus Energy did to the energy market.
When most people tell you, no, that idea will never work, just ignore them.
Chris reveals the secrets to good management.
Manchester United, under one leader, Alex Ferguson, they were hugely successful. You've got to see some tough times, make some difficult decisions.
And the truth about how the United Kingdom can stay a great place to do business.
Any economy that wants to be one of the best places to set up and grow a company should be aspiring to have a market-like game.
Make sure you subscribe so we can continue to get bigger and bigger guests. This episode is in partnership with the Octopus Group. Well, Chris, welcome back to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. I was re-listening to our episode this morning from 4 years ago, and it's just amazing to hear how much has changed at your end. Not least, Octopus Energy has gone from, we were celebrating in that episode, having done 2 million customers. Give us a quick sense of the idea and scale of it now.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Jimmy. Well, things have just continued to fly along across the group, but particularly Octopus Energy, where I think back then it had a couple of million customers. Today it's grown to 7 or 8 in the UK, a couple of million across Europe. The headcount has continued to expand. The reach is so impressive. And I think the thing that's really stuck in my mind throughout the time since we set the business up is the way Greg and his team have huge ambition. And as they achieve things, their ambition keeps growing to the next level. Mm-hmm. And seeing that in an entrepreneur is just so powerful. Seeing that ongoing desire to just keep doing better, to move into new markets, to really continue to take the customer service to the next level, bring out new products. I think that's what we really want businesses in the UK to be able to do. And it's been a real privilege seeing Greg and his team at Octopus Energy do that over the past 5-10 years.
And has now become the biggest supplier in the UK, right?
Well, absolutely. Earlier this year, we overtook British Gas. I think a huge moment for us. But also, I think, really a sign of if you go into a market with something genuinely different and a real passion and drive and determination, and you can access the capital that you need, then you can do great things. And that is absolutely what we've seen. Start up to number 1 in a decade.
Yeah, it's like incredible because it was very much in scale-up mode when we sort of last spoke on the podcast in 2021. And what else has been happening across the group? And do you want to just remind people that might be the first time listeners, we have got a few extras since the 10th episode, I think, that we did with you. Tell us about the group and the 8 companies within it, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the genesis of Octopus was 25 years ago when myself and Simon Rogerson and Guy Miles thought, why don't we have a crack at building a new fund management business? And so much of what we've spent our time doing over the past 2+ decades is really building out capabilities as an investor in areas like smaller companies, venture capital, real estate. We've built a big presence in renewable energy over that time too. Those are really important parts of the Octopus Group. But it's also expanded more laterally into fintech. We have a special needs schools business within the group. We also have Octopus Money that is all about financial coaching, helping people to really understand more about their money, about their pension, about what their financial objectives should really look like.
And that's almost becoming like the sort of latest consumer-facing bit of the business, right? Octopus Money. So in the same way that you've built Octopus Energy, that's been a kind of consumer-facing brand, you're now trying to do more of that with money.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about it, money is one of those huge issues that dominates our lives. Everyone thinks about it. Everyone's very aware of what is happening to their own financial situation. Yet only about 8% of people in the UK have enough assets to be able to access a financial advice. And so we want to do something about that. We think people should be able to access the right kind of financial coaching and input to help people know what might their pension amount to in years to come. Do people know that? I wonder whether how many of your listeners actually have a good handle on what their pension might mean in terms of an annual income when they retire. I suspect the answer is not very many. And that's a real problem. Should people be saving more? Should they pay off their credit card bill? What's the best strategy to help them save towards getting a mortgage? Should people take the pension pots they've accumulated doing different jobs over the years and consolidate them into one? There's so many issues that people just don't often have time to sit back and think about, but actually are really fundamental to your financial well-being.
It's funny. I think you could even do quite an interesting question in terms of how much do people know how much they've got in their pension under 40.
Yeah.
And it's funny how these things happen. I remember when I started all this sort of 5 years ago, my mum being so on it with pensions and being like, make sure you still sort of putting some away. I was like, literally, mum, like, we're trying to get this thing off the ground in the middle of a pandemic. Like, I really don't have much spare capital, but I did it because, you largely always do it. But yeah, actually, like, now actually it's been quite a substantial amount in there because you don't sort of like, you don't sort of notice it when you kind of bake it in, but it is one of those great examples. And we're so British that we don't talk about money, right?
No, we don't. And I think it's a real shame and it's a real problem. People are storing up issues for the future if they are not putting enough money aside, or if they're labouring under this misapprehension that their pension is going to deliver an annual amount of X by the time they're 65 or whatever. And often that amount may be wildly out of kilter with the actual amount that they are saving for at the moment and what that is likely to grow to. So I think more information and education is really important. It's also a real unfortunate feature. A lot of people turned off their pension contributions during COVID and may have forgotten all about that decision and are going to have a horrible shock one day if they don't look at their statement, talk to their HR team, find out how they get that activated again, because it's a real ticking time bomb that we have in this country.
And what else has kind of been happening across the group? Like, there's been so many kind of entrepreneurial endeavours that you're trying.
Well, I think we always want to be the kind of business that is always open to and always thinking about new ideas. I think when businesses stop doing that, they become very stale, they lose their growth, they lose their impetus, and I think they lose what made them special many years before. So a bit like I think Jeff Bezos said, Amazon needs to be a business that is constantly reinventing itself, where every employee thinks of themselves as an entrepreneur. I think that really should be a lesson to every business, that just because you think you might have done great things in the past, every day is a new day. Every day you've got to think about what is the business going to look like in future, what is happening on the horizon, how is technology changing things, what are your rivals doing. We always want to try and keep a step ahead of that and look forward to how do we improve the business we already have, and are there any new areas where we think we can make a real difference? That was what led us into the energy sector a decade ago, was we thought the sector was broken, that people were getting poor service, that there was a real opportunity for technology to play a part. And so we found Greg Jackson and agreed to partner with him and set up Octopus Energy. And, the story from then was, we talked about earlier, but to me, it's always having an eye open for what else might make sense for us. I've learned over the years to never rule anything out, because often I've said, no, we'll never do that. And a year or two later, sure enough, we are. And I think I've also learned good ideas can come from anyone in the business. Often it's younger, newer people who've got a particular insight about how technology is changing, or the kind of product gaps they see, or how they think we as a business have got a bit sleepy and could really reinvent ourselves or do things differently. So I think a business has got to be open constantly to listening and learning from what is going on around it. We work in a totally open plan sort of environment. Simon spends his days sitting in the reception area. We want to talk to as many people as possible, because I think that is how those sparks come about that lead you to meet interesting people, hear about fascinating new ideas, and just open the mind to how a business can develop.
And what is the Octopus working from the office policy now? Because that was actually something that dominated our conversation a bit last time. What is it now, 4 years on from the pandemic?
Well, when I look around the office, I think most people are in at least 3 days a week. Some people doing more, some are in every day. And I think that's really important. I don't think we would ever want to be the kind of business that was highly virtual. I think it is a cliche, but I literally do have discussions by the coffee machine with people that lead to a dialogue about something that is really powerful and just wouldn't have happened if we hadn't both been in the office on that day. And I think for more junior people, they really learn from being sat amongst people with more experience, and they are the ones who often are crying out for that in-person kind of learning and idea sharing that they get when they're sat amongst their teammates. So I think it's really important. I suspect a lot of businesses would find it hard to be like some of the US banks are going back to 5 days a week. I think that is, I think for many businesses that will be challenging now. I don't think it's necessarily needed, but certainly I think 3 or 4 days is going to be the right kind of balance.
Why did you call the group Octopus Group? Because it's one of these things when you're trying to set up a fund management company, you often try and sort of like tap into sort of, heritage and call it Oxford Heritage Capital or something like that.
I think people, particularly in financial services, tend to name their businesses in 3 ways. One is after themselves, pretty ghastly. Second,
dreadful, those people that call their businesses after their
obviously current company accepted. I think some people go for like Greek gods and Roman things, whatever. That, particularly in fund management, is very much a thing. We used to work at Mercury Asset Management. There's been a Jupiter and a Neptune and so on as well in that sector. And some people name them after places or the street they live in or whatever.
Yes.
We thought none of that really resonated with us. We wanted something that was going to be distinctive, memorable, and a bit different. And Simon, one of the other founders, he had a friend who suggested the name to us. He worked in marketing. He sent us this long email one day, this was back in about February, March 2000, saying, I've come up with a name that you should use. This name is based on an animal. This animal is really creative, really cunning, really clever, really flexible, really sophisticated, really intelligent. It's like a long list of things. And at the bottom he says, this animal is an octopus. That is what you should call your company. And I remember we read it once and thought, brilliant, job done. Those weeks of trying to think, what on earth should we call the company were over, and we registered the name the next day. And I guess back then, we thought we were building a fund management business that might one day have a few thousand customers. It was never really intended to be a kind of public-facing brand in the way that it has been now. And so seeing Octopus Energy ads all across London and the UK, but also now in cities like Paris and Tokyo and Milan. Someone the other day sent me a photo of an Octopus Energy branded tram running through the streets of Milan. Those things are a bit of a kind of reminder that how you position a business, what the brand stands for, is it kind of colourful and fun and engaging and memorable? They really do matter.
Yeah. And why does it matter so much, those things?
Well, I think the corporate world tends to be a bit too serious and a bit too dull. You look at a lot of the communications you get from businesses. We've been saying this for years. They still are just... They don't convey anything that the consumer finds easy to understand. They often baffle people with jargon. There's no personality. There's nothing that makes you want to engage with that business. There's nothing that makes you feel any kind of connection or passion. And I think right from the early days in fund management, and it's true of all of our businesses, we think there's no real reason for that. Businesses can display some emotion, some passion, some enthusiasm for what they do. And I think they can talk to people in a language that really resonates with them, that they understand. And to do that, I think you need a brand that people feel comfortable with and feel that they can engage with. And probably one of the best things the team at Octopus Energy ever did was pick pink as their colour, come up with a nice, soft octopus toy as a kind of sort of emblem of the business. I'll never forget being at COP28 in Dubai a couple of years ago. Pretty serious event, lots of people walking around in suits and ties and looking very busy. And Octopus Energy had a stall at one end of the site showcasing their technology capabilities, but they're also giving out big pink octopus soft toys to people. And you could see people a mile off walking around this huge COP28 site with a big pink octopus tucked under their arm. Yeah. And that to me was another sort of pinch me moment at thinking this thing that we set up in my lounge 25 years ago had sort of sprawled into something which now has got this big reach. But with that reach, I think, comes a responsibility, and we're trying to do some really powerful, interesting things to make a difference to the world, to make a difference to consumers, and to try and build a business with the right kind of values.
How do you step away to kind of keep refreshed on this side of things? Because I think that's one of the things that I've found in the last 5 years is that you sort of simultaneously have to hold two things in your head, like quite hard about like, right, what needs to be executed on like today, this week, etc. But then also more broadly of like, where is the wider thing that we're trying to do here? Like, and I find it really sort of tough to do both of those things.
Yeah, it's very hard, isn't it? The day-to-day commands so much time and attention, particularly when you're trying to grow a business. So much is happening. But I think it is important to carve out time to just take a step away from that and not just purely be focused on those day-to-day operational things, to really think about where you're trying to go, what are the decisions you need to take today that you'll be really glad in 5 years' time you did. How are you building a business? What are the things that are going to contribute to that? And I think a lot of businesses just don't really do that. They are so fixated on the kind of things that matter to this month's revenue, rather than trying to build a business that in 5 or 10 years' time people will still love and will be totally relevant and really resonate with customers. I find talking a lot to young entrepreneurs about what they're doing can help with that. What are the kind of ideas that they're caring about? How are they building a business? How are they using technology? People often find talking to their kids can give them insights, or looking at what's happening in other countries too. The same kind of trends generally spread around the world. So I know some people in the UK have built businesses over the years simply by looking at what's happening in the US, which might be a year or two ahead of us in some ways, and spotting, I can build a business that does something similar to what so-and-so is doing in California. That kind of thing can work too. I always say to people, kind of trust your instincts, back yourself. When most people tell you, no, that idea will never work, just ignore them, because people have told us that so many times over the years. And typically if you do something with enough passion and drive, and you iterate and you keep tweaking it until you find what works, then most businesses can have a chance of getting up and running.
What is the biggest risk you've taken as a founder of Octopus?
Well, I remember going for dinner a couple of weeks before we were going to resign from Mercury to tell my parents what I was going to do. And I was expecting them to say, don't be so stupid, you've got a great job, just see out the graduate scheme, stay in a big company. My dad had worked for the same organisation for 35 years. And they didn't. They said, if you want to give that a go, why not? You're kind of young, you learn something. And if it doesn't work, you can probably go and get a job back at a big company again. And they were kind of absolutely right that what maybe a lot of people think is a huge risk, leaving your job to start a business, actually probably isn't. If you've got something about you, there's a pretty good chance you can get another good job again back in the kind of corporate world. So that downside maybe didn't feel as big as some people would assume. I think maybe building the energy business, we put a lot of our balance sheet capital 10 years ago into getting OE up and running, and those early years of the growth that Greg and the team delivered was something that really used up a lot of the firepower that we had in the rest of the Octopus Group. More latterly, Octopus Energy has gone on to have half a dozen great big global investors backing its more recent years of growth, and that's been really important. Great to see. To build a really globally relevant business nowadays, you need access to a lot of cash, and that is a hard thing to raise in the UK.
Yes. And we should come on to that, because you've been so involved basically Octopus has existed the entire time that the AIM markets have, and government has been announcing lots lately about how it's going to try and improve the structure and so on. But can you explain what the AIM market is and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So AIM is essentially a part of the London Stock Exchange for smaller, high-growth businesses. It was set up about 30 years ago to really create an environment for businesses to list in a kind of simplified way compared to the main market, and give them a home that they could then use to accommodate their growth. They could do further fundraisings and build businesses in a market that was really designed to embrace that kind of company. And I think AIM has been a huge success story, something which has probably gone underreported in this country. I think often you don't really realise what you have, but other countries around Europe, I think, would kill to have something like AIM, because it has been a home to hundreds of companies over the years. At Octopus, we've been investing in AIM-listed businesses now pretty much right from the very early days of our business. In some cases, we've been shareholders now in the same businesses listed on AIM for as long as 18 years or more.
Right, okay.
And we've helped to nurture their growth throughout that time. So I think AIM has a really important place in that conveyor belt of capital. If you imagine a startup maybe raising a bit of EIS and VCT money to get them up and running, then progressing through the scale-up phase, AIM, to me, has a logical location in that spectrum for businesses that then want to become a kind of small listed business and then go on to use the market for great things from there. We've backed businesses that maybe were worth 30, 40, 50 million pounds in years gone by that today, maybe a decade or so later, are worth 5, 6, 7, 800 million pounds. And so they've carefully used AIM as a basis for their growth, delivering great returns to shareholders, but also creating jobs, often becoming more international. In some cases, these are not exactly household names, but they are leaders in their own specific field. And they're the kind of businesses that economic growth is driven by.
Based on.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of companies and case studies that have been on there?
Yeah, and sometimes these businesses are not necessarily what you might regard as kind of super high-tech things. You don't have to be making the next AI chip to build a business that can grow. Our team has backed a business called Renew for many years. This provides kind of mission-critical engineering in sectors like railways and so on. And again, it's just quietly gone about using AIM really successfully to do a series of acquisitions, grow from being worth maybe 50 million to 800 or 900 million, just steadily progressed over 10 or 15 years. There's other businesses that we've been involved with in areas like veterinary practices, in healthcare, in ID technology. They've all done the same kind of thing across such a diverse range of sectors. And that is where AIM is really powerful. It's not just a location for businesses that want to make a semiconductor to list. It's actually a home for businesses across such a wide spectrum. And that, I think, is what any economy that wants to be one of the best places to set up and grow a company should be aspiring to have a market like AIM.
So, because if you go through the history of the kind of like London Stock Exchange, right, it almost starts back at the sort of like late 1600s, right? It's like coffeehouse capitalism, all the way there, sort of being agreed. And then it sort of gets more formalised in the 1800s, sort of the signing of 150 stockbrokers, permanent premises comes in the Royal Exchange in London and so on. And it sort of like comes right through to the modern day. But we're seeing such a financial revolution happen over the last 30 years. Like, how much is the challenge that AIM has got is partly down to companies like your own successes in terms of now there are lots more, there's a plethora of private finance options available. Whereas, if you go back to the 90s when it started, there was a lot less of that. There was much more of a kind of financial ladder. You go and speak to the local bank manager to try and get a loan, etc. Now you can crowdfund, etc. And all these. There's just so many more routes to it all.
Yeah, there are more routes, but I don't think that means we don't need a thriving AIM market. Yes, you can stay private for longer, and there are some pretty well-established examples in the UK and particularly in the US where people have built very big businesses in the private arena. But for others, that may not be the right location, and a thriving small-cap market can be really powerful in terms of it gives you a currency to use for acquisitions in terms of a share price with a listed equity that can then be powerful for that. It can make it easier to monetize your staff share options, so it can feel a lot more tangible and real for your staff when they can actually see a share price on a screen as to what their shares in the business are worth, and gives them a chance to buy or sell. Those kind of things are important. Where I think we need to focus now, though, is making sure that AIM has the right sources of capital to support the next leg of its journey from here. And this perhaps is where in the UK we have been suffering a bit. This kind of well-publicised problem of how do we build businesses in the UK? How do we really nurture scale-ups properly? And in the end, that comes down to primarily access to capital. We have no shortage of people in the UK wanting to set up and build a company, but it can get tricky to really keep that business progressing along that conveyor belt, whether you're a private business or a small listed business. If you think about how pension funds invest nowadays, when I started my career, they tended to invest primarily in their domestic market with a bit of overseas exposure. And that's kind of flipped on its head now. People all invest on a global basis.
Yes.
And that means that the amount of money being invested domestically by the average pension fund has become pretty small. If they're only investing a small amount in UK shares in totality, then you can see why UK small caps kind of get a bit neglected. And there have been outflows for every month for many years now from smaller listed companies in the UK. So this kind of crunch has become a real issue. And that has tangible consequences in terms of businesses that are listed being taken over at valuations that are just too low, often by foreign trade buyers or foreign private equity. It's a real shame. It's kind of a wealth transfer from the UK to these foreign buyers that I think we should all care about. This is a missed opportunity at the moment to really grow bigger businesses in their home market where the benefits accrue to the UK.
And hardly a day goes by without a story in the press of like American firms, coming here and buying British ones on the cheap. Not just the Americans, it should be said, but that's a lot of where it's coming from. So what can government do on this side of things, right? Because this is often the sort of question: government shouldn't interfere with free markets. And like, whatever you say about the Labour Party and the Labour government, it's probably not natural. There aren't that many MPs who've been through the sort of business cycle.
Maybe not, but our sense is the government is really engaged on this. I think Number 10, I think Treasury, I think the MP community more broadly recognises economic growth is absolutely imperative. And to do that, you can't just stand back and watch. You've got to be willing as a government to try and create the right conditions to allow businesses to thrive. And capital markets are such a key part of that. So I think the Mansion House Accord, which was announced last week, whereby a group of about 17 pension funds have come together to commit to increasing the amount of money they invest in the UK in what they call private markets. That's a mixture of things like infrastructure and renewable energy, but also into scale-ups and businesses listed on AIM. I think that's an important step forwards. I was really pleased to see the Chancellor specifically mention that this Mansion House Accord had been put together with the idea that some of that capital committed by these pension schemes could help to support AIM. I think that's a really good example of government doing the right kind of thing to try and channel capital in this way. I mentioned earlier about how EIS and VCTs, two really important investment reliefs that back early stage companies, those have got annual investment limits that put a maximum amount that fund managers like Octopus can invest into companies. Those limits haven't been changed for a long time. And the consequence of that is that we often cannot keep backing successful businesses as far as we'd like to. And I think that is also something in the hands of government as to what those limits are. They could be expanded in a way that would allow us to nurture successful companies in our portfolio for longer.
It's almost like fiscal drag from the Treasury side of things, right, in terms of not updating the numbers and the amounts that can be invested. So what are the limits at the moment?
Yeah, so the limits, depending on the type of company, it's broadly £5 million per annum. Lifetime limits that are too small as well versus the full opportunity to back businesses. These limits haven't even kept pace with inflation, let alone being adjusted to really reflect what is the nature of the issue we're trying to tackle now. And I think, again, a great opportunity for Treasury to think, okay, if we really want a thriving environment for entrepreneurs to grow their businesses, what are things in our toolkit? Pension fund money is one, retail money is the other. ISAs are something which clearly is getting a lot of airtime at the moment. I think is also an area that government could use more effectively to channel capital to UK companies.
I think it's interesting because it's like, every politician gets out there and says, no matter what stripes they are, we want Britain to be the best place to start and grow a business in the world. And undoubtedly, I think on the starting side of things over the last 20 years, actually we've sort of gone a long way there towards it. Like, I think it really is now a great place to start a business and so on. But it is this scaling and this growing bit that we've got a real challenge with.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think back to when we set up Octopus, we worked in my lounge for a few months because we had literally nowhere else to go. We had one copy of the Yellow Pages, we had one ancient laptop, we had nothing else. And there weren't really incubators out there or startup hubs. We didn't have any idea how to find angel investors. So thankfully, that landscape has changed enormously. I gave a talk to a group of young entrepreneurs a couple of weeks ago who were all in the process of starting their first business. And it didn't feel to those people unusual that was what they were choosing to do. Whereas when we set up Octopus, people thought we were totally crazy. So that landscape, thankfully, is radically different and certainly something the UK should be really proud about. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Jimmy. The scale-up phase is still too hard. And that is where we have businesses that often end up selling out too soon because they just cannot keep that growth going because they can't access the capital they need. How do we fix that? Well, I think it is pulling every lever to crowd in capital from all available sources, whether it's institutions, pension funds, retail investors, insurance companies, overseas investors. All of them have got to play in that. And I think often the media tends to be fixated primarily on the role of pension funds, but there's so many other routes to also make the most of capital. And that's why we do think things like expanding VCT and EIS limits, tweaking ISA rules so that they are channeled to UK companies, really trying to find ways to stimulate the role of retail investors. If you look at things like EIS and VCTs, our view is people in this country do want to take risk if they understand what the risk is, and if they are choosing to make that investment decision. Where we have a history in this country of products going wrong is when they're kind of marketed as low risk and they end up taking a lot of risk. But the other way around, people are very comfortable with. There is a culture of investing in early stage companies here. What we now need, I think, is to broaden that out so that far more people do something a bit more with their money. We have too much just sat in cash in this country.
Are you a fan of Jimmy's Jobs of the Future? Hi, I'm Sonny, one of the producers behind the show. Have you ever thought, my business deserves to be in the spotlight too? Well, you're not alone. Companies reach out to us all the time, asking us to create podcast and digital video content for them. But until now, we've only taken on a limited amount of projects. But here's the good news. In 2025, we're expanding. Our production company, Boxlight, is now ready to help more businesses like yours tell their stories with high-quality, white-label content. Curious to see what we can do or how much it might cost? Head over to boxlight.io. You'll find examples of our work and even a podcast calculator to explore your options. That's boxlight.io. We'd love to help you shine in 2025. Now, back to Jimmy.
You also talked to me a few years ago about something called taking money off the table, and that being a big thing that you were doing more of with entrepreneurs. So it was trying to get past that entrepreneur perhaps selling the business for 4 or 5 million quid, etc. Can you just explain to us what taking money off the table means?
Well, I think for a lot of people, one of the challenges as you build a business is you start to have something in your hands that has some real value to it, but you're probably still not paying yourself very much. Mm-hmm. You're probably still living very frugally, and you're very aware that a business can encounter problems pretty quickly too. You're not, nothing is in a straight line being an entrepreneur. Things can get hard very quickly. The markets can change. And I think the consequence of that is often people get to the point where they think best way to de-risk themselves and kind of set themselves up for life is to sell their business, even though they know it could go way further. And I think the way around that is to help entrepreneurs sell a little sliver of their equity in their business so they can get enough money to pay off the mortgage, make themselves feel secure, maybe help reassure their family that life will be fine no matter what happens to their business, and then kind of go again, safe in the knowledge that you've sort of got yourself sorted out financially, but then you can throw all your energy into growing the business as far as you possibly can. It's that sort of missed opportunity that I think we suffer from in this country. In the US, people tend to have a slightly different perspective. They are very much all in. They really back themselves. And they know if it goes wrong, they'll probably just start another business and have another go at it. And so I think here we still need to get a bit more American in our thinking.
How do we do that?
Well, it is definitely changing. I think culturally, we see more people now wanting to build bigger businesses. We're going in that direction. Access to capital is important. Role models are important. I think helping businesses recognise which are the markets they can go into, how they expand overseas. We see it with a lot of the businesses that we back. Many of them have the potential to expand into other countries. They often want to, but it's important that they have backers who can help nurture them in the right way, give them the right kind of advice about when to go overseas, how to do it, which markets to pick. Also a role for government in helping with that too. I think there's probably more government support out there than most entrepreneurs realise as well.
Yes, I think that's true. And I'm always struck by it. This is a report now from a very long time ago. It's 10 years. But I remember when I was at the Institute of Directors surveying their membership about who knew about SEIS and EIS. And it was about a third were aware of SEIS and 2/3 were aware of EIS. And I just thought that's a really informed group, really. I mean, it should be close to 95 plus, really. But it just really struck me as that's it. And that's partly because entrepreneurs are really busy building businesses, again, coming back to that point of trying to execute on that week or that month's agenda, and don't necessarily know the various schemes that are available to them in government and so forth. How could we supercharge EIS and VCTs in particular?
Yeah, I think when it comes to those, they've been around a long time. They are really powerful schemes precisely because they're well understood. Many investors have experience of using them, and the entrepreneurial community kind of knows that they exist. So I think they, as a starting point, are the basis for how we create the right conditions for our early stage companies. I would look at the investment limits and double them. I would be really bold and ambitious. I think now is the time where the government can really turbocharge its ambitions towards the entrepreneur community. And I would also expand the age limit at the moment, which means particularly people who've maybe taken a while to get their business growing to the point where they want to bring in some external capital. Maybe it's just taken them a while to find exactly what version of their product or their service really works in the market. And then suddenly they're ready to expand, but they've already been around longer than the existing age limit for VCTs and EIS. This is like an artificial blocker on the ability for backers to support people running businesses. And there's also some evidence to suggest that this is a particularly big issue outside London and the southeast, where maybe a lot of businesses are a bit more tech focused and moving more quickly. In the regions, there are businesses that maybe been around longer and are losing out from accessing this support. So to me, if I was Chancellor, I think with the backdrop we have as a country, being bold, brave and ambitious, perhaps making choices that a few years ago a government wouldn't have needed to or wouldn't have chosen to do, but just going for it now. As I said earlier, pulling all available levers to try and create the conditions where people can access the capital they need. This is really how we're going to grow the economy.
What else could? It's good because in some ways I actually think there is an opportunity for the Labour Party to be able to do more of this stuff than actually the Conservative Party, etc. So what else would you advise the Chancellor and the Chancellor's team to be looking at to give that big, bold, open entrepreneurial offer?
Well, the other thing, to me, the obvious pot that is being talked about is ISAs, partially because there's 700 billion already in the midst of such a well-established savings scheme. 20-odd million adults have money in ISAs. This feels like a route to go. If I was Chancellor, I would reduce the cash ISA amount every year. And I think I would also maybe draw a line under the current ISA regime, allow existing money in ISAs to kind of be grandfathered and continue to be invested globally if that's how people want. But going forwards, I think we should be looking for a product that has government support, really should be seeing that capital support UK companies. That feels like a natural trade-off between tax relief and how that money is deployed. And I'd like to see some kind of new investment product launched that would be similar to an ISA in how it works, but would be restricted to investing in UK-listed companies or in funds that predominantly back UK companies.
So you almost do it like a lifetime ISA, so sort of under the kind of ISA wrapper, but not the full 20k.
Well, I would ring fence and close off ISAs at the end of this tax year or whenever the mechanism could be put in place. And I'd create a new product, a bit like an ISA, could be run off the same kind of platform technology. British investment account, something like that, you could call it, to try and showcase that this is all about nurturing UK businesses. And you'd have a similar limit, could be the same kind of £20,000 a year limit, but with those restrictions I mentioned a minute ago in terms of channeling capital into UK companies.
I think something will happen with ISAs because
feels like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does, and you sort of, when you've been in government and around it for a while, you can kind of get a sense of when this stuff is beginning to get a bit of a drumbeat, and it was like getting trailed a lot before the sort of last budget. So you just think it will be something they come back to, but it's such a big kind of financial change that they probably pull back from it slightly, being like, we need to get more of our ducks in a row on this.
Yeah, and this is, to me, one of those examples, something you could just tinker with it a little bit, or you could go and make some ambitious kind of change that would really drive it towards a kind of direction that I think is going to be needed to really support the UK economy. And so now perhaps a year into a new government, as you say, perhaps Labour has a little bit more room to be brave on this. So it'll be fascinating to see what direction they choose to go.
It certainly will be with that. Now, one of the things that I was thinking about where you were talking there was about when you and Simon started in your lounge on an ancient laptop, etc. Big block of yellow pages there. Like, it is crazy now how much we use AI in terms of that stuff. Like, even here at Jimmy's Jobs and Boxlight, it is very much like that's how we're starting each morning. Is basically like a sort of, senior strategic level advisor sitting there helping you with some of that stuff you're mentioning around angel investors, right? It's like, come up with 30 angel investors for me, and it kind of like will do that. But you're at a slightly different stage now, running a sort of mothership of several hundred people. How are you using AI in kind of like day to day?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI has such huge applicability, and I know many investors and entrepreneurs are trying to challenge themselves around, if you're not using AI a lot in your business, then what are you doing? You're missing out.
Yeah.
It has such, I think, revolutionary potential in terms of just like how do tasks get done in a business. A lot of things which 5, 10, 20 years ago we used to do in a particular way don't need to be now. And that, I think, is where businesses that have been around a while need to totally re-engineer themselves, look at all their processes, all the ways they do things, and kind of go through it all in terms of, could this change? Does this need to change? If we don't change how we do this particular task, are we going to end up so inefficient that our rivals are going to find that they can operate with a lower cost base or deliver better service or be quicker or whatever? So to me, it's, yes, all of the kind of trendy, simple little ways in which, how many speeches have you been to where someone reads out half the speech and then says, oh, yeah, I got this written by ChatGPT? There was a bit of a cliche of that a year or two ago when everyone was trying to show off how they were using it. But I think a lot of the usage is going to come in how we simplify information, how we track things, how we access information, how we make decisions, and how we streamline a lot of business processes. And that is, I think, going to be hugely important for businesses of all ages, whether it's you're an entrepreneur building a business from scratch, or whether you've been around 25 years and you're trying to figure out how to really position the business for the next 25.
What have you used it for on a sort of day-to-day basis as a chief executive of a company?
I mean, it's even simple things like trying to figure out the best route to get to different places. If you're trying to like plan a trip, working out, right, I need to be in, Tokyo and Seoul and Australia over the space of 10 days. What's the best way to do it? To juggle that around? But there's the kind of the trivial, mundane things that it can make a real difference to. But then there's the kind of proper business processes. I know my colleagues in our energy business are really using AI to try and make sense of all of our customer interactions and simplify those into action points for our customer service team. That means you don't have to spend hours listening back through calls and reading back through a customer's email exchanges with other members of the team to get a gist of what their issue is. You can get all of that simplified for you in seconds with a suggested course of action in a way that delivers great customer outcomes and saves the team members' time so they can focus on the more fiddly things or the actual tone of the customer engagement.
Because you've never really used a PA, have you? In the 4 or 5 years we've kind of...
No, I mean, I find I don't like just seeing all of my emails disappear out of my inbox without having had a chance to look at them. And I find I can access help from Jane, who works closely with Simon, if I need help with particular things. Yeah. But different people work in different styles and different ways, I guess.
Yeah, but I just find it interesting. How have you kind of like continued to evolve and like learn as you've gone through the different stages of the business, right? Because it is a very different skill set running a company of 700 people to you and Simon starting out in the lounge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And things do change. We were very lucky in the early days of Octopus that there was we hadn't planned it this way, but it turned out to be a fairly natural divergence in the skill sets that we each brought to the business and the kind of things we were good at, we're interested in, how we spent our time. And that's kind of continued. But I also think as a business grows, it's really important that you keep challenging yourself around what are you good at, what do you enjoy doing, how can you make a difference, and what are the needs of the business. So for me, over the last 5 or 10 years, that's involved spending an increasing amount of time on things like our engagement with the outside world, talking to government and talking to regulators and talking to institutional investors around the world. Things that maybe 10 plus years ago we just didn't do, maybe we didn't need to do. But I think now, for a variety of reasons, we've got the kind of scale where we need to be present in a different kind of way. We want to be more international on the fund management side. We have a growing number of institutional clients from around the world, often pension funds and insurance companies have entrusted their capital to us. So I travel pretty regularly to places like Seoul and Tokyo and Australia. Never did that 6, 7, 8 years ago, but it's an important part of what I do now. Something I really enjoy. It's like a new challenge. I think as an entrepreneur, as a business person, if you're not learning something every day, then I think you have to question why not and how could you be. And it is those new challenges that make you think, where are we going as a business? What more could we do with that foreign investor base, for example? What kind of products are they really interested in? Where could we take Octopus to be more relevant to these kind of counterparts?
And how do you keep the motivation going as well, right? Like, you've made plenty of money now, you've gone so far beyond what you initially started, hopes and dreams, etc. How do you sort of keep the motivation going?
To me, it comes from a variety of sources, I think. Firstly, I don't think anyone, if you think about what you might want to tell your grandchildren one day you achieve with your career, I don't think your grandchildren are going to ask you how much money did you make. I think they're going to ask you, what kind of business did you build? What did it stand for? What did it achieve as a business? And so I think taking Octopus into areas that we're really proud of in terms of the impact we have, the customers we serve, the kind of feedback we get from our client base, those things are really powerful to me and make me feel really motivated and really proud. I think the continued sort of growth of Octopus Energy, a huge part of that as well, seeing how that has evolved. Doing things outside of Octopus, important. I back a number of entrepreneurs personally, work with some of them to help give them a bit of advice and some of the learnings we've made, often the hard way over the years. But I also think it's really important to have a kind of pace of work that you can sustain indefinitely. And so people sometimes say to me, running a business, you must have spent years working like 18-hour days. And actually, I think the reality is most people cannot work at that kind of pace for very long at all. And if you want to build a business that's got longevity, then you need to find a way of working that you really enjoy, that you're comfortable with, and that you can sustain pretty much indefinitely. So to me, that is not working 18 hours every day.
It's very similar. Funny you talk about it like that. We were talking beforehand about running, and I remember my wife saying to me, actually, like when I started running 5 years ago, around the pandemic, classic kind of cliche and so on, but she was like, you will be able to find a pace eventually that you can just basically just continue to run at. And I think it's so true, like in that sense of, so much of kind of business and is about stamina and just being able to kind of like keep going at that thing as well.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely is. If all you're trying to do is build a business for a year and sell it, then maybe it doesn't matter. But if you want to build anything that stands the test of time, then I think it's critical that you set the right kind of pace. You also have to, I think, build a culture in the business that you really enjoy, work with people that you think bring something to the business. I think maybe last time we talked a bit about the kind of radiators or drains kind of personality kind of style. When you're hiring someone, do you want that person to be sat in your office for 10 hours a day? Yeah. Or are you inflicting some kind of nightmare on your colleagues in doing that? These things really matter. A business is not just run off a spreadsheet. It's about human interactions. It's about how you feel as a group internally. It's about how you make your customers feel. And that is not something that is kind of one-dimensional. That is something you've got to get right. You've got to nurture it and work at it all the time.
There was something you said as well that struck with me listening back, 190 episodes on now, or whatever but I referenced sort of business being like a family, which I winced at the time. And listening back to it, and it's partly because you go on later to pull me up on it in the episode, although not directly, but you say that actually running a business is not like a family. Like, that is a kind of like a misconstruction of it, really.
Well, yeah, I think in the sense that in a family, you can't really choose who your siblings are or your children or your parents. You are who you are, and you kind of love them as a family unit. But actually, I think of it more like a team, where actually what you're on a quest for is the components that go together to make that team high-performing, sustainable, cohesive, share a common goal, motivated around the kind of cause that you have as a team. And I think you kind of see some parallels in business. If you look back at, say, Manchester United, under one leader, Alex Ferguson, for 20 plus years, they were hugely successful. Then they got into a cycle of changing the manager constantly, and success has eluded them. I think you also get into problems with teams where people don't really hold each other to account, or you start to tolerate poor performance, or you have disagreements that are not properly worked through, or where you have the defence not playing well with the midfield. It doesn't work, it doesn't function. I think the same is true in business. You need everyone to really feel part of a strongly managed, well-run team with a clear purpose, a clear goal, strong team spirit, all of those kind of things that you see in successful teams on the pitch. I think you can take some of that same kind of perspective and bring it into the business setting.
Definitely. And it's one of my favourite books is the Sir Alex Ferguson and Mike Moritz one about the similarities between business and high-performing teams, etc.
Absolutely, I think there's a lot that business can learn from those successful sporting teams.
Yeah, definitely. And we even talk about a team here and where people are playing in like a formation side of things, partly as a kind of like as a common lexicon to be able to sort of understand it all as well a little bit, because I think that's one of the things of like modern business is changing so rapidly, and it can sometimes be difficult. But actually, if people can associate the position they're playing with a position on a sports field, it does just sort of help somewhat people kind of like ingrained in what their job is, I found anyway. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it also highlights occasionally you may have a team member who just isn't good enough to meet the needs of that team, or the team may have grown beyond that particular person. And so in that, it is okay for team members to change every now and again. But if you can do that in a way where it's done in a kind of seamless kind of way, where you treat people well, and where the incoming people understand the kind of culture that they are moving into and what's expected of them, and you set the kind of right parameters, then teams can evolve and change composition, but still maintain that success. And that, I think, is what Ferguson did so brilliantly at Manchester United for so long.
I think the hiring thing that is interesting as well, like the advice that you talked about, just in terms of, obviously there's a lot of different things that you look for in the business over the years. But yeah, I remember thinking after we'd listened that I basically went on to go and make lots of mistakes that you talk about. But that's one of the things that I find so interesting about entrepreneurship business. Like, I sit here now having done this for 5 years, and all the cliches about how you have to get used to people saying no, and you need resilience and grit and all of it. Like, it all seemed, I knew all that before going in, but like, until you've actually experienced it, you just can't. You just don't quite.
No, exactly. You gotta live and breathe that. You gotta see some tough times, make some difficult decisions. You gotta really keep going when maybe others will tell you, oh no, that's not quite working. I think you've got to be super flexible. So your business has evolved. Every business does. Very few businesses end up being successful just doing exactly what on day one they thought they were going to do. The key to me is always spot what you're good at, spot how you can iterate and evolve, and then keep taking a business in that direction. And that does mean, like, don't waste months on a 100-page business plan that just will never survive any actual engagement with reality.
I saw something this morning actually from Timo of Gusto, which really struck with me, because he was giving the advice that he would like to give himself 14 years on from having found the kind of meal box delivery company. And it said, and I'd never heard this before, it said, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And I thought that is so true, because basically the solution is going to change. Like, whatever you think it is at the beginning, like, it won't be that by the end. And I just thought that is a really neat way of putting it, actually, that I hadn't kind of heard of it before.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is just recognising that that ability to evolve really quickly, to pivot, and to feel fine with that. I think people who struggle in startups are those who expect their job in 6 months' time to be exactly the same as they're doing today, who struggle with change, who are not very adaptable. Life's just not like that in a startup. Things are constantly changing. You're testing things, you're trying things, you're seeing what works. And often, where a business finds something that does work, it may not be the route that they had first envisaged. Their distribution channel might turn out to be different, or the product might evolve. And you see that in really big businesses like Apple. Today Apple's key products are not what they did 20 years ago, but they've taken the same kind of mindset around sort of elegant simplicity and brought it into new areas that have gone on to become clearly mega successful. I think a lot of businesses have had to go down that kind of route, and it's something which I think we try and challenge ourselves with every day too.
What other businesses out there have sort of impressed you recently? What should be on our radar?
I think what I always really admire is any business that has stuck it out for a period of time, trying to make a difference to a sector that they really care about, and where they really care about sort of making a difference, building a business in the right sort of way. And I think any young entrepreneur out there who's started a business and made it, stuck at it, got somewhere, made a business scale, that's the kind of thing I find really impressive. I've been an investor in a business for quite a number of years that makes charity fundraising software, for example. And that business was set up by a guy called Chester when he was still at university. And he's now been running it 10 plus years. It's really scaled. It now powers a lot of the fundraising behind the London Marathon, which is the single most successful charity fundraising event ever in the world. A UK phenomenon, and they provide the software that many of the runners use to do their fundraising. Like it's a solution to a really specific need. Does it really well, and it's got a young team who've done a great job. Those kind of businesses.
Which company is that?
It's called Enthuse. It's not a household name. It's not trying to be, actually. It's very modest to be in the background, so that the charity itself is what the customer experiences, the person donating experiences. But it's a business that now has the opportunity to expand internationally. It's going places. Its revenue is now double-digit millions. These are the kind of businesses we need to see a lot more of in the UK, and figure out how do we help people build something in their sector that can really thrive and end up employing 50, 100 people, build value for its shareholders and its founders.
Tell us a bit about the Octopus Entrepreneurship Awards as well, because this is something you've been running for a few years now.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really designed to say to MPs, tell us about an amazing person in your patch who's set up a business and is doing great things. I think it's really important that MPs are connected with the entrepreneurs in their area. And it always absolutely astounds me the kind of stories that we hear about. Often incredible sort of backstop to how these people have come about, what has got them into doing their thing, how have they chosen to set it up, what sectors are they in. Really powerful, really interesting. We've had 16-year-olds starting catering businesses. We've had people starting net zero gin businesses. We've had a really broad range of things all around the country. And they're really inspiring stories. And I think if we can help showcase to MPs that in every corner of the country there are people doing fantastic things, creating jobs, building businesses, I think it helps create that entrepreneurial story in Westminster that links with their home patch, but also I think just helps give a bit of an ability to have that dialogue around how do we support more people to start businesses.
And the winners get to kind of come and spend a day at Octopus HQ, don't they, and get taken through by some of the experts of different things for their businesses? Yeah,
absolutely. We invite them to London. We get them to spend a bit of time with the MPs who nominated them, and also then spend a day in our building where we introduce them to our experts across areas like social media and marketing and public affairs and all of the kind of things across a range of different areas that they may need going forwards as they look to scale their business. It's usually a really fun day. get to meet a bunch of interesting entrepreneurs and hear their stories. Yeah, I really love it. It's a big part of our culture that as to what we do at Octopus.
If you were to come back in 3 or 4 years' time, what would you like to have achieved? What's on the kind of roadmap?
I hope we'd have continued to really make our mark, particularly in areas like financial coaching and helping the public understand more about their money. I think this is a huge problem at the moment. Clearly, it's been a tricky time for many people on their personal finances over the past 5-10 years. And there's been a lot of change. And I think this is an area that we feel we could try and make a difference to. So I hope I'd be able to tell you we've continued to scale in that area. I hope Greg and his team at Octopus Energy will have continued to move forward and really built some scale in other places. So proud of what they've done so far. And I also hope we'd have some new things to tell you about too, where we've identified places where we think we could make a difference. Because, as I said earlier, I think whenever a business kind of stands still, it sort of loses its real impetus. And I think we want to be the kind of business that always has a thirst for new ideas and to be really open-minded about where the future might take us.
We've got a few quick fires for you. What did your parents do?
So my mum was a medical secretary, and my dad worked at HSBC all his career.
Oh. What did you first do for money?
My first job for money was a paper round I did from when I was about 13.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Back in the day when at the end of each week you got given a little envelope with like £5.37 or whatever it was in cash.
What did you spend your first paycheck on?
I actually used to save most of it. I think that was maybe where quite quickly I got my investing kind of mindset. Yeah.
What car do you drive?
Now,
Yeah.
a Porsche Taycan.
Is that electric?
Yeah, electric. Yeah.
And what would be the dream job that you would like to do more than anything else? So like scuba diver, professional golf player. What would be something you'd like to experience for a day, maybe? Maybe that's a better way of asking that question.
A day.
Because everyone says, I really love the job that I'm doing, which is the whole point of Jimmy's jobs, is to get interesting people on. But it's like...
Yeah, I guess so. I'd like to maybe do something totally different. I'm hopeless at cooking, but, when you see like an amazing chef and what they're able to turn out and just how they do that under pressure,
Yes.
in one of those like fancy restaurants, those kind of things always intrigue me. How do people do amazing things that I just think I have no natural aptitude for that at all?
How to do it. You've been doing more and more kind of in the housing space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A year or two ago, we thought a natural extension of what our real estate team did, where they'd been building things like care homes and retirement villages. We thought we'd take it into affordable housing. Now, clearly, the UK has a huge need for more new homes, particularly affordable ones. It's also an area where the investment community is keen to play its part. So pension funds, insurance companies keen to put capital to work in this area. So we've set up a team. It's been up and running a little while now. I think it's got a huge opportunity to grow over the years ahead. It's already been involved with, I think, about 500 new homes. But its ambition is for a number much greater than that. So, yeah, it'll make us feel really proud at Octopus if we can play a little bit of a part in helping to tackle the UK housing shortage.
Why do we not have enough affordable housing in the UK, right? Because I see it with the team here. I'm really, sort of worried, but I just wonder how they're going to get on the housing ladder, right?
Exactly. It's a huge problem. I remember when I first moved to London, my rent was £260 a month. I thought that was a lot. Now I hear the kind of figures that young people in our office are paying today, and it is really scary.
You put one in front of that,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
For a shared...
Yeah. And with a really hard route to see how people are going to get on the housing ladder. I agree this is a huge challenge. For a country that regarded itself as a land of homeowners, we are moving rapidly away from that. So I think a lot of it comes down to how long does it take to get planning? It's a hugely painful process. I know the government is committed to finding ways to speed that up. I think that will make a difference. Being able to build in more places, unpopular with so many, but if we don't free up more land to build on, this problem is never going to go away. And I guess maybe I'd say to typically, older people living in bigger houses and so on is, what do you aspire for your own children or your grandchildren in terms of how you want them to live? And I think that is the problem. If we don't do anything about that, we're condemning our children and grandchildren to a life really of house prices that are way out of reach. And unless they get help from parents, very, very difficult to get on the housing ladder. So speeding up. The problem in this country is not one of demand. So I think schemes that help give people a little bit more money to buy a house don't really work. What we need is more supply. So we need to figure out how do we build more homes. And I think that comes down to planning permission and access to land.
So if I understand it right, then what you're saying here is that you want to do to money what Octopus Energy did to the energy market.
Well, I think exactly that. If you look at the energy sector, it felt like people weren't getting a great deal, no use of technology. The businesses in that sector weren't really looking after their customers that well. And we thought we could make a difference. That was the thesis a decade ago. And now we serve 1 in 4 UK households. In money, the problem is that very, very few people can get access to the right type of advice. We want to do something about that. And if we can crack that, it'll make a huge difference to people being able to get some proper input about their finances, how to organise them, how to think about their pension, their savings, their mortgage. We want to do that at scale, using technology to help make that possible, and doing so in a fun, engaging way, true to the Octopus values. And so in that sense, what Greg and his team have done at Octopus Energy is a bit of an interesting parallel about how to go about building a business that really scales and makes a big difference to the public.
Brilliant. Well, Chris, thank you very much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future again. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for all your help and support over the years. It's been great talking about it all again.
Yeah, thanks. Really enjoyed it, Jimmy. Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Thank you.